Hello, my name's Odessa Esco, and this is English Culture. English names. Now, what is an English name? It's a name that sometimes people decide to create, and it's called an English name because it's easy for English natives to say, or it's a common name in the English language, like Michael, Jessica, names like that. This video is talking about keeping your cultural name, keeping your birth name when speaking to native English speakers and furthermore, white people. There's English language, and I'm an English native, of course, but then there's also like English Anglo-Saxon culture, which I am not a native of. This is more so, British people, Americans, and white Canadians. Of course, being a native English speaker doesn't mean you have to be of Anglo-Saxon culture, but there are a lot of things from that culture that are embedded in the English language. For example, names. And of course, we have so many people learning and speaking English as a second, third, even fourth language. And with that comes different cultures of names. Like I said, I'm an English native, but I'm not native to like white culture or European culture. In Canada, it's very much white culture at the top of everything. There's a lot of multiculturalism, but a lot of people are assimilating into the white culture that's there. As you know, Canada was colonized, and we have indigenous and native people who are there before the settlers and what do they call them? The pioneers. And they were put into these places called residential schools. Residential schools literally stripped natives of all of their culture, including their language. They would cut their hair, change their names, beat them, abuse them in all different types of ways in the name of God, but also in the name of white supremacy. Black people have a history more than just slavery, but a part of it is slavery. During the time of the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of people were taken from Africa, Black people, and they were treated the same as the Canadians treated the indigenous people of this land. They would change our hair, change our appearances, separate us from our families, and of course, change our names. Now, we can discuss why they changed our names a little bit. Of course, we are speaking different languages. They didn't understand us, so they gave us names because they didn't know our names, even if we told them to them. Also, we weren't respected as humans. They didn't care about what we had to say. So you're Bob, you're Joe, you're whatever. A lot of African origin names and a lot of cultural names in general have meanings. They represent our families, our tribes, and also our personality. Now, all of that history is taken away when your name is taken away. When I was younger, I was growing up in a white neighborhood, but my parents always made sure that I knew where I specifically came from. This meant I watched the miniseries Roots. This was about a man named Kunta Kinte who was taken and abducted from Africa and brought to America to be a slave. I haven't seen this miniseries in a long time. I know I watched it as a kid and I stayed home from school. It was during Black History Month, in which the school I went to did not acknowledge. I was one of the only Black people in the entire school, not including my other siblings, of course. So my mom made it. At the time, she made us, but now, looking back, I'm grateful for it. It was a cultural experience that I personally needed to have, and I never forgot, especially moving into non-native English spaces. So in the miniseries, it documents a lot of what happened during slavery. It showed you how they were taken on the boats. It showed you how they were treated, but it showed you how they were stripped, like spiritually. And it started with changing their names. Kunta Kinte, his name was Kunta Kinte. And of course they wanted to change it to something like Chicken George because he worked with chickens. So all these white people would call him Chicken George, and he'd always be like, no, my name is Kunta Kinte. He was getting beaten and all kinds of craziness because he refused to let them change his name. He had a wife and kids, and they always called him Kunta Kinte. And I just remember the scene at the end where, oh my gosh, why? No! I did my makeup. Okay. At the end of the movie, he dies, and they ended up cutting off his legs because he kept running. He never stopped trying to leave. He never accepted what they told him. He knew he wasn't a slave. So they ended up cutting off some of his body parts to make it more difficult for him to run away, i.e. his legs. And when he died, I remember, oh my gosh. Okay. When he died, one of his children went to the gravestone that they had made. It had said Chicken George on it, and they crossed it out. And oh my goodness. Okay. They crossed it out and they wrote Kunta Kinte because that's his name. And I swear, I practiced this whole thing and not a tear dropped. Okay. They crossed out his name, Chicken George, and put Kunta Kinte because it not only represented who their father was, but it represented who they were. They came from a strong lineage. They were proud of who they were. Nobody could tell them any different because they saw their dad respect himself and further respect his name in front of all these adversities. When I'm speaking about changing your name to accommodate, white people, I'm not talking about lighter skin like Arabic and other Europeans like in Turkey. I'm not talking about people like that. I'm talking about white Americans and white British European people in those spaces specifically. There's a lot of pressure for you to conform and change your name for ease of them. Now, a lot of people would say that this doesn't make sense, and I agree because there are a lot of difficult European Anglo-Saxon names like Leonardo DiCaprio, Picasso, Da Vinci. There's a lot of names that I had to grow up learning in history class that were difficult for me to pronounce. So the idea that certain names are just easier or not easier is inherently racist. Certain names are white and European, and certain names are not. And that became very clear as I went through a space with a Europeanish name, and people still chose to find difficulty in it. People attempted to nickname me. If you're going to ask somebody to change their name or give them a nickname without permission, I find that disrespectful. Who uses English names? Now, of course, English natives do, but in the past, a large group of non-North American people started using English names. This was during migration periods from Asia to North America, from Mexico to North America, a lot of places into the Americas, and also England. In these spaces, white culture is predominant, and sometimes to make your life easier, you would just create an English name instead of having people try to pronounce your cultural name or your native name. There are a lot of good reasons people did this historically. I have some articles linked in my English culture Google Docs that you can find in my channel description. Click the link tree. In it, I provide some articles from people of different backgrounds and cultures, and they explain their experience in name changing through the generations of their family. One in particular is an Asian person, and a lot of people coming from the continent of Asia to this day still have an English name. Now, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but the idea of an English name is inherently racist. There's a reason why you need to change your name to be more palatable or easy to say, and it's because a lot of people, English natives from certain areas, they don't have experience with a lot of cultures outside their own, and when they do, They try to subconsciously or consciously put you into their culture rather than expanding their point of views or their world and including your culture. This will reflect in the types of jobs and types of education you're allowed to receive. There have been numerous studies done that white sounding names or black sounding names are treated differently through North America. And it was kind of the same based off your gender, whether you're a man or a woman, it didn't really matter. But when it came to race, there were huge differences in the callbacks that you would receive. The same resume, different name. I have sisters with more stereotypical black names, and they have gone through points in their life where they have changed their names or put their middle names on their resume, and they've gotten better responses. And it's honestly just heartbreaking because nothing has been changed except for their name. Now, going back in time, it was really hard to be an immigrant. It still is in many places, and people would change their names out of safety. If maybe you were fair skinned, you would change your name to pass to make people think you're white. This would allow you a different class in society. You'd be treated better, and you'd have access to better things like food, healthcare, and jobs, which is really important. I say this to say, don't assume everybody who has changed their name has liked it or has done it because they think it's cool. I think that has come with time. A lot of younger students I meet are excited to have an English name. It's an opportunity to rebrand themselves, to be somebody else. That's always kind of fun. But as time goes on, there have been negative repercussions, which is the erasure of your culture. Whether or not you want to be a representative of where you come from or your ethnicity, you are. We don't get to choose everything in this world, including our race and our history. I think it's very important, personal opinion, I think it's very important to uphold and uplift wherever you come from, because there's been so much erasure, especially in English culture. The idea of an English name is just so hauntingly close to what they did to people during slavery and residential schools that I can't ever feel right about listening to a student tell me their English name. For one, I think there's two sides to this. As a person who's an English native, but not of the English culture necessarily, of like the white Anglo-Saxon culture, I think it's like a little triggering for me. Is it right or is it wrong to have an English name? Everybody is open to their own opinions. In my opinion, there is no right or wrong. I like to focus on the repercussions of using an English name. What does it really mean when you decide that having an easier sounding name is more important than having your name be accepted and be practiced in English? In my opinion, it's a form of erasure, and there are many examples I can give as to how not using your name from your country, from your culture, from your religion is actually quite harmful in the long run. Maybe your name sticks out in a room full of white people or in a room full of native English speakers, and you don't like that, it makes you uncomfortable. It's your right to avoid it. But also, why does it make you uncomfortable? It's the lack of acceptance in these spaces that make an English name attractive. If English natives were open and welcoming to different types of names and different types of cultures and languages, it wouldn't feel awkward. Even if your name was very, very different from all the other people in the room, you wouldn't feel awkward. You might even feel special. So I think on one side, we have the right to make yourself feel comfortable. And on the other side, we have to question, why do you feel uncomfortable? Referencing my Kunta Kinte example, and that symbolizes how he could be erased just by having that tombstone not say Kunta Kinte. History would have been erased there. Not only was the history going to be erased, but also the future of the pride and the longevity of that name. If people stop using their cultural names or their native names in English spaces, then they'll stop being accepted, they'll stop being used, and poof, It'll just disappear. I personally don't want that to happen, and that's one of the big reasons I don't think students should use English names. I know it can be uncomfortable to have people say your name incorrectly or in a different accent, but the more and more people learn to speak English and the more English evolves to accommodate all the different aspects of, foreigners speaking English, i.e. the accents, the body language, and the new words they bring when they speak English as a non-native. This is a good way to keep that appreciation and get away from the idea of perfect English. English has a very large and long culture of making other cultures and other people feel small or disappear completely. We share English way more equally than we did in the past. There is no right way to speak English. There is no ideal English language speaker. The more people show off their accents and are proud to use their accents and their native names, the more open English will become and the more normalized those names will become. It'll get easier and easier to be like, oh, that's Tomoko. Yeah, that's Tomoko. Like, that's Tanjiro. People can say all these anime names and all their favorite characters and fighting games. I'm sure they can say your name if you give them the opportunity. If somebody is being disrespectful with your name, that's something you should always correct, and sometimes they don't deserve to know your real name, and I understand that. I don't always give my real name. There are lots of situations where using your name or using a fake name is kind of advantageous or safer, but in general, the idea of having an English name as a need to be accepted in the English-speaking world is ridiculous in 2025. Your name is more than welcome in English, and honestly, it's needed. We need to preserve our native cultures and languages, even in English, because it might not be there otherwise. As more and more people learn to speak English, less and less languages that aren't English are being spoken. Keeping your name is, an honor, a way to let people know that you respect and value them, you believe you're being listened to, and it's a way to show that you uphold your own culture. It's a way to preserve your ancestry and to keep a future for names like you moving forward. The less people use those types of names when speaking, the less people will use those types of names when naming their child. So I encourage you to get rid of your English name if you're comfortable. People around you might be ignorant, might be racist. Those are just bad people. And honestly, if your name can show you who's not your friend sooner than later, it's a benefit. If somebody is disrespectful to your name or says something when you correct them about how to pronounce your name, or when you don't let them give you a nickname, that's a reflection of them, and you should really question if you should be in that space or you should be around those people, honestly. I know that's easier said than done, so again, this is my personal opinion. Drop the English name. I want to know your real name. Say your name, okay? It's important. What name are you gonna die with? Just like Kunta Kinte, what name are you gonna die with? Use that name. What name is going to be on things that are important in your life, like your diplomas, like your marriage certificate? Say your name. It's important and it's valid in English. All right, I know I said a lot. I would love to hear your opinion. Do you have an English name? What made you feel like that was the best thing for you? Would you consider going from your English name back to your native name at your work or in social spaces? How would that make you feel? Your own thoughts and opinions if you do have an English name. And if you don't, I would also like to hear your thoughts and opinions when people ask you to call them a certain name that you know isn't maybe their real name. How does it make you feel? Do you think they think you're stupid, that you can't say their name? How does it make you feel that you're giving a vulnerable piece of information perhaps to you? Like, I feel vulnerable when I give somebody my name and then they don't give me their real name. I'm like, now they know something about me that I don't know about them. So, but that's just me. This is an English culture video, so please leave comments down below for something else that is culturally relevant in English, and I'll try to get to a video about it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Stay cute.